welcome back to another episode of Miller's Movers. Going to be a shorter episode this week. We've got loads of content coming for you on the SBK channels. Big Grand National preview where we run through all 34 runners, and then the daily podcast that we have for Cheltenham, myself and Tipping Tom Collins are back covering the Thursday, Friday and Saturday's racing. So slightly shorter this week. Can have too much of a good thing. So we're just going to be a short 10-minute pod for Miller's Movers. Thought we'd just take a little look at a couple of early handicap fancies that I have on the Thursday and the Friday, and also a look at just how perhaps the change to the fences at the Grand National have changed the type of horse you're looking for in the big race. So the Thursday, there's actually only one handicap on the Thursday card, and it comes at 4:40, the Red Rum Handicap Chase. And here I quite like the look of Primoz for trainer Lucinda Russell with Patrick Wadge in the saddle. Unfortunately, Derek Fox is on the sidelines with a couple of fractured vertebrae. Primoz, I still think, looks quite well handicapped off a mark of 130. To my mind, he's best suited by a flat track and a sound surface. He won well at Wetherby at the start of the season. He then went to Newbury for a better race off a mark of 131, was yet to play his hand. He was towards the rear of the field when he fell 3 out, but given how strongly he stays and how nicely he was travelling, I think he would have certainly played a hand there. That fall perhaps took its toll because he didn't run so well next time out at Ayr when well beaten into third, but he bounced back to Kelso on his penultimate start, and then crucially was really well backed on the morning of the Grand Annual into single figures from a fairly big double figure price. Clearly someone associated to the yard felt this was a horse that was well handicapped, and things just didn't go his way. Derek Fox was keen to get off to a good start. They had a false start. Derek Fox went forward. They were called back, and then from the standing start, Primoz, a young, inexperienced horse, didn't really jump away with him, was towards the rear of the field, could never really get into it, and wasn't given a hard time by Derek Fox once it became apparent that his winning chance had gone. And personally, I'm not sure that Cheltenham would have been his track anyway, but he stays on a mark of 130. He gets back on a flat track with a lovely long run in at Aintree. Derek Fox is off. Patrick Wadge steps on board, but if you want a forward aggressive ride, Patrick Wadge is certainly the man. He was very good on Martown in the Ultimate at Cheltenham, so I have no reason to doubt his abilities on Primoz here. And I just think in a field that's largely made up by pretty exposed handicappers, Primoz for Lucinda Russell at a track we know she does well at certainly looks a little bit of value at this stage. On to Friday then, and there's two handicaps here that are of interest. The first at 2:20, the William Hill Premier Handicap Hurdle over 2 miles and 4 furlongs. And there's two I like in this, and I might well play them both depending on their prices on the day. The first is Wreckless Eric. Now this horse has really caught the eye a couple of times this season. He's a strong finisher, as we saw when he won at Cheltenham in November. He then finished very strongly in December behind a horse called Mirabad, who slipped the field down the back straight on that occasion. Wreckless Eric did by far the best of everything that was held up there, finished really powerfully. He then went to Windsor. You can put a line through that. Windsor is certainly not a track at the moment that would suit hold-up horses. I certainly wouldn't worry about that form line. And he then went to the Imperial Cup, bumped into a very well handicapped Go Dante, but Wreckless Eric did some really good work in the closing stages, ran on into second. To my mind, he looks a horse that will be suited by a big field handicap, suited by a good ground, and certainly suited by the long home straight and a step up in trip at Aintree. So I think he's got compelling credentials for this race. And then the other one is Navajo Indy, who's been pretty popular on the podcast this year. I think both myself and Tom have tipped him at various stages. We both quite liked him for the Betfair Hurdle, where he ran on his latest start. That was over 2 miles at Newbury on decent ground, and he got absolutely taken off his feet in the early stages. I do think maybe Gavin Sheehan could have perhaps got a little bit closer across the top of the track at Newbury, but when he did ask him for maximum effort, Navajo Indy really flew home. He's previously got good winning form at Newbury in a lesser grade over 2 miles. He finishes his races off very strongly indeed, and I think a step up to 2 mile 4 is really going to suit him, and it might well also reward Tom Simmons' patience. There was lots of people questioning whether he would go to the Martin Pipe or the Coral Cup at the Cheltenham Festival. Tom said he didn't think that that was perhaps the right call for this horse, wanted to keep him back, go to Aintree fresh, and plenty of horses in here are going to be trying to double up from the Coral Cup, the Martin Pipe, go on to Aintree with just that 3-week turnaround. Navajo Indy's going to get there fresh. I think this step up in trip could bring about massive improvement, so he's certainly on my shortlist at this stage for the William Hill Handicap Hurdle 2:20 on Friday. Then the 5:15 on Friday, the closing race of the day, is the Conditional Jockeys Handicap Hurdle. Always a race that's run at a frenetic pace over 2 mile and half a furlong, so you do generally tend to need to stay a little bit further than just 2 miles. And I've got two on my radar for this at the moment. Tutti Quanti for trainer Paul Nicholls. He's got plenty of good conditionals associated to his yard that could take the ride. Tutti Quanti last seen when finishing down the field in the Supreme, but at most points of the race it looked like he'd get pulled up. He was tailed off fairly early on, but he made really good late progress, finished in the end, I think it was 7th, making some quite nice developments up the hill. So it looks like a horse that will want further in time, but he's got a handicap mark of 128. I think that looks plenty lenient enough. He was mentioned on the first Millers Movers podcast after the Cheltenham Festival as a well-handicapped horse, and it'd be interesting if they take up his engagement here. 2 miles on lively ground might still find him out, but I know they'll go quick in this race. Last year, the winner came from a long way back, having got off to a poor start. So wouldn't worry me unduly if Tutti Quanti was struggling to lay up through the early part of the race. I think he'll come home strongly. It could just be that he does still want a little bit further than this, though. And then the other one is Jack Hyde for Fergal O'Brien in the Paddy Brennan Racing Partnership Silks. This horse has won really nicely the last twice at Southwell in fairly low-grade races, but crucially, he won last time out under Fergal O'Brien's conditional Tom Broughton. Got a really good ride, really patient ride. He's a strong travelling horse. That last win at Southwell was over 2 mile 4. He won it over 2 miles previously. They were both off marks of 114. He's up a little bit now in the handicap, but I could just see him cantering through this race with travelling like a really good horse, and he'll certainly come home strongest of all, given he's got stamina for further. And we should also point out that Fergal O'Brien, who's perhaps struggled to maintain his form throughout the season, has been a bit up and down, but he's currently on an upward trajectory, 29% winners to runners for the last 14 days. Certainly think he's a trainer you want to be keeping an eye on at Aintree. And then to finish with, I thought we'd just have a quick look at the change that have been made to the Grand National course over the years, largely designed around safety factors and trying to keep the sport in a positive light for the mainstream public. And of course, Grand National is a race that many people that wouldn't watch racing for 364 days of the year do watch the Aintree Grand National. So I do largely concur with all the changes that have been made, particularly the 34 runners. I see a lot of people that really get upset. There's six less runners in the Grand National. I was a very moderate point-to-point jockey and made plenty of mistakes, but the worst experience I had was riding in a 24-runner maiden around a track where now the safety factor, so the maximum number of runners, is 16. There was absolutely no daylight. You couldn't see where you were going. It just wasn't a very enjoyable experience for horse or jockey at all. And I think the fact they've taken 6 out does mean that horses can get a little bit more daylight. It means that jockeys aren't having to make late manoeuvres towards fences, and horses tend to jump their best when they feel confident, and they tend to feel their most confident, like us, when they feel balanced and secure. And if a jockey's having to shift left or shift right close to the fence, that can impact on a horse's balance and therefore impact on their ability. The fences are also different in that now the internal part of the fence, the inner part, used to be made of timber, now made of plastic. It's also a little bit smaller, so you've got more birch, more fir across the top of the fence, means a horse can brush off the top part, and rather than getting met with something quite resistant which will check their momentum, they can still glide over the fences. You've also got a lot of the ditches, particularly at Beecher's Brook, that have been filled in. The landing sides have been raised. The drops aren't quite so severe if you jump a little bit short of the fence, and you can see the pictures back in the day of Beecher's Brook, a horse not jumping out far enough over the ditch, catching the back of the ditch. So although you still need a good jumper, you perhaps don't need a horse with such a tremendous amount of scope. And by jumping scope, I mean simply the ability to create power to get high and to get far out over a fence. But I don't think you'll jump round Aintree on a bad jumper. They need to know what they're doing. They need to be accurate, and certainly accuracy and jumping efficiency is as a premium, because the fences are a little bit smaller. You don't going to gain as much from jumping a long way out over the fences, but you still need to know what you're doing and to jump efficiently. You certainly don't want to be on a bad jumper, to my mind. So the type of horses that I now think have perhaps been advantaged by the change in the fences that perhaps wouldn't have been on my radar 5, 10, 15 years ago, the likes of Hewick, Dufflecoat, Highland, Intense Raffles. They're nice, neat horses. They don't strike me as being big, strapping, jumping chasers of bygone era, but they're very neat, they're very efficient, and they get from A to B in a really neat way. Conversely, horses that I still wouldn't have on my radar, the likes of a Rocco, Broadway Boy, Monbeg Genius, maybe even Royal Pagaille, they can all make a mistake. Royal Pagaille particularly can lose concentration at its fences and make a mistake. Concentration, I think, is key, particularly in a big field handicap. There's 34 runners in this race going down over the first fence, hopefully 34 going down to the second and third as well. And if you're on a horse that's getting distracted by what's going on around him, that does make your job an awful lot harder. So although the jumping test has changed, I think people that call it a glorified hurdle race are wide of the mark. Yes, it is undoubtedly not the jumping test it once was, but I still think it's a pretty unique jumping test. You need a good jumper, and I certainly still apply a good deal of weight to finding a selection on a horse that's got a good jumping background. So that's it for this week, a shorter, sharper podcast. Remember to tune in now this week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday for the preview pod with myself and Tom Collins. And also Wednesday morning should be up the big SBK Grand National preview. We've taken a look at all 40 runners, come up with our 1, 2, 3 as we see it. So be sure to check that out as well. In the meantime, enjoy your week racing at Aintree, the greatest race on earth. And I'll see you next week.